Greetings, deodorant grav tanks, and welcome to Codex Compliant, the series where we take a look at the various codices, magazines, and general stuff Games Workshop have put out over the years.
Today we're looking at something that isn't actually a codex, the 2001 chapter-approved compilation.
Since basically forever, Games Workshop have been putting additional rules and lore for their games into issues of White Dwarf. When done for 40k, it has sometimes been done under the banner of the Chapter Approved column. It was a pretty common thing for a while during 3rd edition, headed up by the then 40k overfiend Andy Chambers.
There were 3 chapter-approved compilations put out from this era, and we're looking at the first one, which is either called Chapter-Approved Gaming Material for Warhammer 40,000, or Chapter-Approved The Second Book of the Astronomicon, depending on where you look. In case you were wondering, the whole Second Book of the Astronomicon thing is a reference to a similar book released all the way back in 1988. The cover also appears until you look very closely to just be entirely black.
Spinal Tap reference.
But despite the bland cover, there's a lot going on in here. Too much, in fact, to entirely cover in this video, so don't be annoyed if we don't mention, I don't know, the fact that it corrects the Blood Angels Force Commander's leadership value from the Codex or whatever. Oh, I guess we've mentioned that now.
First up in here are the army lists. There's 4 in total. The Sisters of Battle, NECRONS, Death Company, and Imperial Guard Armoured Company. The Sisters, who always seem to be waiting on a new codex, whatever edition you're looking at, get 12 pages of fluff and rules here, enough to tide them over for a couple of years before they finally got that codex of their own. Well, sort of their own. Basically, it added a lot more depth to the 5 pages that they had in the main 3rd edition rulebook, giving them Acts of Faith, more war gear, and extra units. Can't really say how much of this is new and how much was in the 2nd edition codex because, well, it can be a little bit pricey to pick up nowadays.
Now for the Necron list, and it's a little interesting. You see, the Necrons were only really mentioned in the 3rd edition rulebook as a miscellaneous alien, but they actually first appeared in 40k as Necron Raiders in late 2nd edition, with their rules printed in White Dwarf and reappropriating the old Chaos Android design. The stuff in Chapter Approved is pretty much a retooling of that old 2nd edition fluff and rules so that the old models could be used in 3rd edition. They're super limited in what they can take, just Lords, Immortals, Warriors, Scarabs and Destroyers. There's also no mention of the Catan or how the Necrons became T-800s with an ancient Egypt fetish, and the artwork is, well, it's very un-Necron. A year later they get reworked into much more recognisably modern Necrons, but this is still really cool, like peering into an alternate reality version of the faction. A version of them that would be more at home painted on the side of a van.
The Death Company list is pretty short and not really a list per se. It's just modifiers and restrictions for a regular Blood Angels force that entirely succumb to the Black Rage. You couldn't take just a bunch of Death Company in 3rd, you had to roll a bunch of die to see how many models you get. There's this whole thing, and we can explain it at a different time. The list includes things like a restriction of what vehicles you could take and a 25% increase in unit cost, but also confers things like a +1 attack and leadership, and every model benefiting from the Death Company's Ignore Injury rule. There's also a profile for the Death Company version of Captain Tycho, said to be him at his final battle at Tempestora Hive. You know, which is pretty rad.
The Imperial Guard Armoured Company list is exactly what it says on the tin, giving you the option of fielding an Imperial Guard army that consists of nothing but a parking lot full of vehicles, with the occasional guardsman riding in them, I guess. It also contained rules for a few tanks not in the Imperial Guard Codex at the time, like Salamander scout vehicles and Destroyer tank hunters.
Next is a large Q&A section, which although not super useful in 2018, does patch up some errors in the codices should you wish to play them now for some reason, such as the inclusion of a banner waiver stat line that was missing from the 3rd edition Orc Codex.
Interestingly, also in the Orc Q&A, they explicitly state that Orc blood is red rather than green. I say interestingly since we mentioned it in the last episode. In universe, the reason is stated to be because only their skin contains the green algae, not their blood, and out of universe because red shows up better when painted on the green skin.
And I quote, "When you try using green bloodstains on orcs, they look like they've just had an unfortunate accident with a gooseberry squishy."
After the Q&A, there's a bunch of miscellaneous rules for various forces, like the introduction of the 5+ invulnerable save for Terminators, Grey Knight Terminator squads, Chaos Cult Terminators, and some other stuff that isn't Terminators. There's even expanded rules for night fighting, that thing I always wanted to play games with but could never actually be bothered to.
But the big thing in here, the crown jewels, are the vehicle creation rules. A fairly large portion of the book is devoted to giving you the ability to fairly work out the rules and points of your own custom vehicles. They even use the classic Road Trader deodorant hover tank as an example, and it's nice to see it getting an airing again.
Rather than describe the process, because there's a lot to it. We thought it would be best to just show you. So we're going to come up with the rules for this, one of my old orc looted wagons that due to a cold and uncaring universe I haven't been able to use for several editions. First, you pick a type and size. In this case, it's a tank and it's normal in terms of size. This means it can have up to 56 points of armour on its 4 sides. Since it's based on a rhino, let's just give it those stats, but with an extra point of armour at the rear, since this panel on the back is the only bit on the model that is actually made of metal. Next, you pick if it's open-topped or not. Going by battle wagon logic, although the drivers are protected, this bit is supposed to carry orcs, so I guess it counts as open-topped. Then you pick a speed. Logically, since it's painted red and the mechs probably put a bigger engine in it, let's just say it's an agile vehicle. Not quite fast, but quicker than normal.
Then we have the weapons. Disappointingly for an orc vehicle, this thing only has one, a Scorcher, which would cost 15 points. There's also the option of adding vehicle upgrades from the appropriate codex, so let's make the red paint job official for 3 points, and let's also make it a transport since, well, it is. So it'll be able to carry 11 models. I'm sure that's fine. All that's left now is to work out the points and figure out what category it belongs to.
The base armour costs a total of 50 points. Being open top means we don't have to pay to be armoured, but making it agile adds 15. Then there's the Scorcher and red paint job, that's a further 18 points, and finally giving it a transport capacity costs 1 point per model. Oh, and since it has less than 50 points of weapons, this would count as a transport vehicle as far as force organisational stuff goes. So in total, this vehicle we now dub the Hellsquig would cost 94 points, and would probably be terrible. Making it was fun though.
Still, we barely use most of the rules here. There's rules for walkers, flyers, super heavies, even giant tyrannid creatures. Basically, it's like the Land Raider variant builder from the most recent book to bear the name chapter approved, but the scope is far, far bigger. Honestly, this kind of thing is just amazing, since converting up weird vehicles is a big part of the hobby for some. And you could use this to come up with rules for pretty much anything. You want to play this in 40k? Sure. This? Totally. This? Oh, okay, maybe not.
After that, the book gives you a bunch of extra mission types, including assassins, not to be confused with assassination, before going into alternate, more elaborate and confusing rules for Colonel Schaefer's last chances, who could be used as a force on their own to counteract their complexity, and they look charming. The last new rules we get in here are a trio of Ultramarines special characters, all last seen in the 2nd edition Codex Ultramarines. Ancient Helveticus, who sounds like a font but is actually a super special standard bearer, Chaplain Cassius, who's gone on to be in a couple of novels, and Captain Invictus, who is armed with a Plasma Blaster special weapon that isn't just 2 plasma pistols glued together shut up. Although his page is the only one in our copy that's chosen to fall out, so I think it's trying to tell us something and we should move on.
The last thing we'll mention here is the battle statistics. Here we have a sample of the victories and losses of each faction and what percentage of time they've won against each different force. Obviously the sample size could be bigger, and shockingly the website is from is no longer there, but it's still really interesting. Although we do suspect some of these may not have enough data to prove overly useful. I mean, it's possible that when the Space Wolves fought a Sisters army in 2001, the Wolves won 100% of the time, but I'm skeptical.
And that was the 2001 chapter approved compilation. As we said, there's a lot we've not mentioned or just barely skimmed over. It's just packed full of info, but I guess that makes sense since it's pretty much a best of the content from the chapter approved column.
Now if you'll excuse us, we're going to try and figure out how many points it would cost to field Serpentera over here.
He's going to need a lot of structure points. This might take a while.